He hadn't slept in days, tormented by fear of the dark, until the humble nanny makes him fall asleep in her arms. But when the millionaire arrives and sees the scene, he does something nobody, not even her, expected. The summer rain hammered down hard on Los Angeles, a thick, grey veil that turned the afternoon into an early dusk. The rideshare sedan glided silently to a stop before the side entrance of a Bel Air mansion, a behemoth of stone and glass that seemed utterly indifferent to the storm. For Eliza, every detail of the place was an affront to her reality. The wrought iron gate, towering like a promise of exclusion, the deep silence imposed by the thick wall, swallowing the sounds of the city. And the moment the housekeeper opened the door, the strong, sober scent of polished wood and expensive, scentless flowers. It was an aroma that announced a place where luxury had methodically stifled laughter. The housekeeper, a woman with an impeccable bun and tired eyes named Adelaide, led her down a seemingly endless corridor. Eliza's footsteps, even in her worn canvas flats, echoed on the polished marble, and she felt like an intruder, a misplaced component in this mechanism of wealth and order. In the adjacent study, she glimpsed a man's back, his bespoke suit perfectly aligned, his voice a precise murmur on the phone, discussing moving capital before the Asian markets opened. Inside that world of appearances, a 5-year-old boy refused to sleep. Since his mother's passing, sleep had become hostile territory, a place of profound absence. His father, Marcus Thorne, a financier whose heart operated like a ledger of profit and loss, rode out the nights glued to stock tickers and the silent panic of not knowing how to fix his own son. The meeting took place in a room with heavy drapes that blocked any trace of light or hope. Leo sat tensely on the bed, his sightless eyes fixed on a vague point ahead. Eliza approached slowly, her simple uniform contrasting sharply with the Egyptian cotton linen. On the nightstand, she found a forgotten braille book, the thick pages marked with raised dots. Without asking permission, she sat on the edge of the bed and began to speak in a soft voice that seemed to weave a cocoon of calm around them. She didn't read the story. Instead, she described the colors of the rain outside as if they were instruments in an orchestra. "Are you listening?" she whispered, and the boy turned his face toward the sound. "The fine droplets hitting the leaves are like a gentle tambourine, a light shaker. That's a greenish sound, almost yellow. But the thunder, the one that comes from far away and makes your chest tremble a little, that's the deep rumble of the kettle drum, a big, dark blue sound that announces the music is about to get stronger." Leo tilted his head, his tense expression slowly dissolving. Eliza continued, speaking of water puddles as symbols and the wind as a mournful saxophone. Gradually, the boy's breathing calmed, his body relaxed onto the pillows, and his small hand sought hers, intertwining their fingers with desperate trust. He fell asleep like that, cradled by a symphony only he and she could hear. Minutes later, the door opened noiselessly. Marcus entered, his expression hard, ready to witness another failure, another sleepless night. But he stopped, petrified. At the scene, the young woman from the city's periphery, with her scent of the real world and simple uniform, held the hand of his most precious asset, the only part of his vast estate that truly mattered. In that instant, the financier's heart, accustomed to the relentless pace of investments and cash flow, suffered a system crash. An unfamiliar sensation, warm and dangerous, rose in his chest, and he didn't know what to do with it. In the days that followed, the mansion's routine began to change at a delicate, almost imperceptible tempo. In the mornings, the smell of fresh coffee and crisp bacon infiltrated the halls, an aromatic rebellion against the frigidity of timed meals and the bitter espresso Marcus drank while reading market data. Adelaide, the housekeeper, observed everything with studied neutrality, but her eyes sometimes betrayed silent support for this small revolution. Marcus, for his part, felt like a spectator in his own house. From his study, where he analyzed spreadsheets detailing his vast portfolio, he heard the echoes of a life he didn't recognize. Eliza's low singing of an old lullaby, Leo's genuine laughter when she taught him to listen to the house. The boy, previously a small statue of sadness, was now learning to map his world by sounds: the specific creak of the fifth floorboard in the hall, the subtle draft that slipped under the library door, the hum of the large refrigerator motor in the kitchen. These were details that had always been there, but were only now gaining voice. The financier, accustomed to running board meetings and closing multi-million-dollar deals, felt his control over the domestic environment slipping through his fingers. This transformation bothered him. It was organic, emotional, and above all, unpredictable. One afternoon, he found Eliza and Leo sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by glass jars containing different types of grains. She was teaching him to distinguish the sound of rice, beans, and corn, creating a new game. His son's joy was palpable, but Marcus saw a threat in the scene. The proximity between the two, the bond strengthening with every hour, was an asset he didn't control, an investment of affection whose return he couldn't calculate. Fear, a feeling he efficiently disguised in the business world, manifested as rigidity. "Eliza," he called from the doorway, his voice as sharp as ever. "Leo's leisure time is scheduled. Please adhere to the timetable." The young woman merely nodded, the light in her eyes dimming for an instant, and her fear was confirmed. Any genuine affection would always be viewed with suspicion, perhaps as the first step of a self-interested plan. The tension settled in like the humidity before a storm. Marcus became more distant, his interactions with Eliza reduced to brief, monosyllabic orders. He needed to maintain distance, reaffirm the boundaries between employer and employee, between his life of wealth and the simple world she came from. Late one particularly heavy evening, a sudden blackout plunged the city into premature darkness. The mansion's emergency lights flickered and came on, weak and ghostly. Marcus, Eliza, and Leo were in the hall, preparing to go upstairs. Impatient with the idea of navigating the stairs in the dark, the financier guided them toward the private elevator, a cubicle lined with dark wood and mirrors. The door closed, isolating them from the rest of the world. The elevator rose a few feet, then a metallic jerk and a mechanical groan brought them to an abrupt halt. The emergency lights flickered one last time and died. A heavy silence and absolute darkness swallowed them, dense and suffocating. In the dark, the only sound was Leo's frightened, ragged breathing, which turned into a muffled sob, and the dull pounding of Marcus's own heart, which raced with an anxiety he had never, in his entire life, confessed to anyone. The dark, airless cubicle became the epicenter of panic. Leo's low, gasping cry was a high-pitched sound piercing the blackness, and Marcus felt his own chest constrict, the air refusing to enter. His mind, trained to analyze risk and calculate losses in complex international deals, suffered a complete collapse. All his capital, his fortune built with iron discipline, was useless here. None of his assets, neither the gold held in Swiss vaults nor his high-yield investments, could buy a ray of light or a breath of fresh air. He was just a man, helpless, trapped in a metal box with his terrified son. The scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the soft lavender aroma coming from Eliza, creating a strange fragrance of despair and calm. Then her voice cut through the silence, not with authority, but with a softness that seemed to have weight and form. "Leo, honey, let's breathe together," she said, and her presence became the only anchor in that blackness. "Put your little hand on your chest. Feel that. Your heart is beating fast. Like a scared little bird." Marcus heard the rustle of fabric as she moved, likely kneeling to reach the boy's height. "Now let's teach the little bird to fly slower. Pull the air in through your nose, deep like you're smelling a flower. Hold it for a moment, and now release it through your mouth like you're blowing out a birthday candle. Leo's breathing remained irregular, but the crying stopped. He was listening. Marcus, meanwhile, felt his own heart hammering against his ribs, a rebellion in his body he couldn't subdue. His anxiety was a liability he hid from everyone, an unpayable emotional debt. He heard Eliza's voice again, guiding the boy with infinite patience, and, driven by an impulse that came from the depths of his panic, he did the same. He placed his hand over his chest, beneath the expensive fabric of his shirt, and felt his own disorder. He drew in the air, the sound rough in his lungs, and released it slowly. In the dark, the three of them breathed in unison, a fragile, shared rhythm. Marcus was no longer the multimillionaire, and she was not the nanny. They were just three human beings trying to find their way back to calm. The darkness that had been frightening now became a strange veil of intimacy. There, without the masks that light imposed, the hierarchies dissolved. He could feel her presence, the calm emanating from her steady breath, and he clung to it like a castaway. Suddenly, with a violent jolt, the emergency lights flickered and returned, weak and yellowish. The elevator groaned and began to ascend slowly. When the doors finally opened on the correct floor, the hallway light seemed blinding. They stepped out in silence, blinking to adjust to the brightness. Adelaide was there, her face pale with worry. Leo, still sleepy and frightened, clung to Eliza's leg. Marcus stood still, looking at the woman in front of him. Under the emergency light, he saw the subtle, dark circles under her eyes, the silent strength in her posture. A new, unspeakable intimacy existed between them, forged in the shared fear of that dark cubicle. As Eliza bent down to pick up the bag she had dropped, Marcus's gaze was drawn to a book that had partially slipped out. The hard cover, with serious academic lettering, was unmistakable. He read the title, and the words seemed to echo in the silence of the hallway, adding a new and disconcerting layer of complexity to the woman who had just saved them all. Developmental psychology and childhood cognition. The next morning dawned with the artificial normality that money can buy. Power had been restored. The house functioned with the precision of a Swiss watch, and the smell of fresh coffee tried, unsuccessfully, to erase the memory of the darkness and the fear. Marcus, however, couldn't concentrate. In his study, the computer screen displayed the fluctuation of foreign currencies, dollars and euros, and the performance of his stocks, but his mind was trapped in the elevator cubicle. He, a man who had built a fortune by taming the chaos of financial markets, who transformed liabilities into assets with surgical coldness, had been completely subjugated by a simple power outage. Shame was an acidic sensation in his stomach, but what disturbed him most was Eliza's calm. That serenity wasn't passivity, it was strength, and the discovery of the psychology book added a layer of complexity that disarmed him. She wasn't just a caregiver, she was a student of the human mind, an expert in development, and he had underestimated her. Later, he found her in the pantry, preparing Leo's snack. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust particles in the air and the subtle fatigue on her face. He needed to regain control, to transform the uncomfortable situation into something logical, manageable. "I saw your book last night," he said, his voice more formal than necessary. "Are you a student?" Eliza turned, her movements deliberately slow, as if measuring every gesture. "Yes, sir. I'm taking classes in education at night." The reply was short, without elaboration. She offered no information he hadn't asked for, raising an invisible barrier of professionalism. Her attitude frustrated him. He cleared his throat and presented his proposal, disguised as pragmatism. "For the safety and efficiency of the house routine, I will start driving you to and from class. It's a necessary investment to ensure Leo's stability." He used the word investment on purpose to demarcate the territory. This wasn't a favor, it was a transaction. To his surprise, she refused. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Thorne, but it's not necessary. I can manage on my own. I always have." There was an unshakable dignity in her refusal, a silent declaration of independence that irritated him and, contradictorily, made him admire her even more. He didn't insist, but the seed of the idea was planted. In the days that followed, he observed. He saw Leo's anxiety grow toward dusk, the boy asking every half hour if Eliza was back yet. One night, he found his son dozing on the living room sofa, refusing to go to bed until he heard the sound of her key in the door. The information came from Adelaide. During a brief morning report on the household, "The boy only really settles into a deep sleep, sir, after he hears the sound of the gate when she arrives." It was the leverage he needed. That afternoon, he approached her again, his strategy refined. "The ride isn't for you, Eliza. It's for him. Leo needs to know you are safe so he can rest." He cornered her, using her affection for the boy. It was a low blow, and he knew it. She stared at him for a long moment, the conflict visible in her eyes. Her independence against the peace of mind of a child. The battle was short. "All right," she conceded, her voice low. That night, the first journey happened in tense silence. The interior of the luxury car, with its scent of leather and technology, felt like a bubble separating them from the world. Dropping her off at the gate of the modest local state university campus, he watched her walk away, backpack on her shoulders, and felt a pang of something he couldn't name. Hours later, when she got into the car for the return trip, she carried the same Braille book from the first night. Marcus glanced at the object in her lap. "What does it say?" he asked, more to break the silence than out of genuine curiosity. Eliza gently ran her fingers over the page, as if reading the texture of the world. "It's a children's story about a little bird who was afraid to fly in the dark and ended up teaching the whole forest to breathe, to find calm." Marcus slammed the brake harder than necessary. The car stopped in the middle of the deserted street. He turned to her, his face a mask of incredulity and pain. Where did you hear that story?" His voice was hoarse, loaded with a past he kept locked away. This wasn't just any story, it was the story his late wife, Beatrice, used to tell Leo. Marcus's question hung in the rarefied air of the car, heavy and charged with an urgency Eliza didn't understand. She looked at him, at the way his white-knuckled fingers gripped the steering wheel, at the rigidity of his jaw under the yellowish light of the street lamp. "It's in Leo's room," she replied, her voice cautious. "I found it the first night. I thought it might help calm him." The silence that followed was even denser. Marcus's mind traveled back to a time when the house still held laughter and the sunlight seemed warmer. He remembered the day Beatrice arrived with that book, her face illuminated by an enthusiasm he rarely saw. "It's special, Marcus," she had said, running her hands over the raised pages. "It's so he can see the story with his fingers, so the words have texture." The book had been one of her last gifts to their son, an investment of hope against the encroaching darkness. And now, here it was, in the hands of a stranger who seemed to understand its profound meaning without needing an explanation. "My wife, Beatrice. She bought it," he said, the words coming with difficulty, as if trapped in his throat for years. He didn't usually talk about her. To talk was to remember, and to remember was to feel. And feeling was the weakness he didn't allow himself. Eliza merely nodded, a gesture of silent respect that was worth more than any word of consolation. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and the simplicity of the phrase made it genuine. Marcus started the car again, but the tension had changed nature. It was no longer the friction between employer and employee, but the electricity of an unexpected connection. He watched her from the corner of his eye as he drove. She ran her fingers over the pages of the book with a familiarity that intrigued him. "You know how to read Braille?" he asked, curiosity overcoming reserve. She smiled, a small, melancholic smile. I learned the basics. My younger brother, Javier, has low vision. When we were kids, I used to adapt books for him, gluing twine and seeds on the pages to create relief. I trained my sense of touch so much that I can feel the marks, the wear that your wife's fingers left on the words she read most often to him. The revelation hit him like a wave. It wasn't a coincidence. It was something deeper, a resonance of lives, of pains and cares that mirrored each other. This woman's empathy wasn't a talent, it was a scar. She carried in her history the same language of affection that Beatrice had tried to build for their son. The drive back unfolded in a different silence, a silence of understanding. For the first time, Marcus didn't see her as an employee or a piece on his control board. He saw her as a person, complex and resilient, whose life had uniquely prepared her to enter his. When they arrived at the mansion, the lights seemed more welcoming. But the normality was broken the moment they entered. Adelaide was waiting in the hall, her face etched with worry and uncertainty. In her hands, she held a small metallic object shining under the chandelier light. "Mr. Thorne, forgive me for the late hour," she said, her voice trembling. "I was organizing the office documents, as you requested, and I found this. It was at the bottom of a drawer, in a box with Mrs. Beatrice's things." Marcus looked at the object in her hand, and his blood ran cold. It was a silver flash drive, an old model he instantly recognized. Beatrice used to save voice recordings, thoughts, and lullabies she composed for Leo on it. He thought he had gotten rid of all of them, that he had erased every trace of that voice to survive. The existence of that small digital file was a doorway to the past, a Pandora's box he had no strength to open. The presence of that small metallic object in Adelaide's palm transformed the atmosphere. For Marcus, the flash drive wasn't just a storage device, it was a ghost, a relic of a time he had brutally strived to bury under layers of work, discipline, and emotional distance. Beatrice's voice was there, encapsulated in those circuits, and the possibility of hearing it again was terrifying and, in a way he hated to admit, tempting. He reached out, his fingers stiff, and took the device. The cold metal seemed to burn his skin. "Thank you, Adelaide. You may retire," he said, his voice muffled. The housekeeper left, leaving a vacuum of silence in the sumptuous hall. Eliza remained where she was, a few feet away, a silent witness to that invisible turmoil. She could sense his pain, a dense, palpable energy emanating from the man who stood like a fortress. Their eyes met for a brief instant, and she saw there not the billionaire CEO, the master of the finance universe, but a frightened man, cornered by his own memory. He turned abruptly and walked toward the study, closing the door behind him with a soft but definitive click. Eliza was left alone in the corridor, the Braille book still in her hands. She knew this was a moment of private grief, a sacred territory where she had no permission to enter. She climbed the stairs slowly, her heart heavy with a compassion that choked her. In Leo's room, the boy was sleeping restlessly, mumbling disconnected words. She sat in the armchair beside the bed, the dim light softening the contours of the expensive furniture. Her mind, however, was downstairs, imagining the lonely man in his study, facing the echoes of a lost life. Inside, Marcus connected the flash drive to his laptop with trembling hands. A single folder appeared on the screen. "For my little bird." The click of the mouse sounded like a detonation in his ears. The list of audio files opened, most named with dates and simple titles: Rain Song, Wind Story, Leo Laughing, Age 2. He felt the air leave his lungs. It was too much. It was too cruel. Driven by a mixture of self-preservation and cowardice, he dragged the cursor toward the trash bin. He was one click away from erasing everything, from silencing her voice forever, but his finger froze. What if that voice was the only thing that could reach Leo in the darkness he lived in? What if his effort to protect himself from pain was actually depriving his son of the only inheritance that truly mattered? The internal struggle was violent. His instinct for control, his need to keep emotions as manageable liabilities, screamed at him to delete everything. But the image of Leo, his small hand intertwined with Eliza's, the calm the nanny managed to bring with her stories, made him hesitate. Perhaps the path to healing wasn't silence, but sound. In a decision that contradicted all his instincts, he copied the files to a secure folder on his computer and disconnected the flash drive. He wouldn't listen to them. Not yet. But he wouldn't destroy them either. It was a compromise, a fragile truce in his personal war. The next day, the house operated under a new layer of tension. Marcus was quieter and more distant than ever. During breakfast, he barely touched his food, his eyes fixed on an invisible point beyond the window. It was in this charged atmosphere that his cell phone rang. It was his press secretary, her voice unusually urgent. "Marcus, good morning. Sorry to call so early, but you need to see this." A link appeared in his messages. He clicked, his stomach churning with apprehension. The page that opened belonged to a well-known high society gossip site, the Aspen Insider. The headline, large and sensational, leaped out at him. "The magic nanny from the hood. Meet tycoon Marcus Thorne's new protege." Below, a photo of Eliza, taken from afar, likely at the college entrance. The article, written with saccharine venom, narrated a fabricated rags-to-riches story, insinuating that the humble young woman was using her influence over the vulnerable child to secure her social climb. And, at the end of the text, citing a close source, was the final jab, delivered with the cruel elegance of his ex-fiancée, the fashion influencer Veronica Lane. It's an inspiring story, almost a modern-day fairy tale. We hope she knows how to manage this investment in her future well. The article was a masterpiece of malice disguised as admiration. Every word was calculated to poison, to transform an act of genuine care into a strategy of social opportunism. The phrase "magic nanny," which might sound like a compliment, became, in context, a derogatory nickname, insinuating artifice and manipulation. Marcus felt a wave of icy fury surge through his spine. Veronica, with her skill for transforming appearances into capital, had taken his family's vulnerability and turned it into a public spectacle. The mention of the investment was a direct and personal hit, a distortion of his own words, thrown back at him like a weapon. He knew exactly what she was doing, marking territory, reaffirming her influence in a world where public narrative was more valuable than truth. The pressure from his press secretary followed, relentless and pragmatic. "Marcus, this could become an image problem. The board won't like seeing your name associated with gossip. We need to control the narrative. Distance, discretion. No more rides, no more interactions that can be misinterpreted. We need to show that your relationship with the employee is strictly professional." The secretary's words echoed the cold logic with which he had always conducted his life and business. Protect the assets, the brand, the reputation. These were the pillars of his empire. Emotion was a risk, a liability he couldn't afford to accumulate. The decision, therefore, should be simple, rational. He called Eliza to his study. She entered, her eyes as calm as ever, still ignorant of the storm that had formed around her. He didn't show her the article. He simply communicated the new directive, his voice devoid of any inflection. "Starting today, Eliza, for reasons of company protocol and security, our interactions must be limited to the strictly necessary and professional. We will maintain a formal distance. Adelaide will be responsible for any communication regarding the house routine. You will return to using public transportation." Each word was a stone, building a wall between them. He offered no explanation. He couldn't. Explaining would be admitting that Veronica's opinion mattered, that the gossip affected him, and he would not give her that power. Eliza's reaction was almost imperceptible, a slight stiffening of the shoulders, an eyelid that trembled for a fraction of a second. But her eyes, once filled with warm understanding, became opaque, mirrors of polished professionalism. "Understood, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice perfectly neutral. And she left. The coldness that settled in the house was deeper than silence. It was an absence. Leo's laughter diminished. The soft music Eliza used to hum disappeared. She performed her tasks with impeccable efficiency, but the soul of her care had been removed. The smell of brewed coffee was still there in the morning, but it seemed just an aroma, not an invitation. The tension, however, peaked in Leo. The boy, with his sharpened senses, perceived the change in the house's emotional field. He felt the withdrawal, the loss of a warmth he had barely begun to know. One stormy night, the fever came, high and sudden. He trembled under the blankets, his small body burning, his mind delirious. "I can't see what I'm feeling," he cried out in panic. "It's all dark inside." Adelaide called the doctor. But it was Eliza who was by his side. With cool hands and a steady voice, she began to narrate the rain outside. "Those aren't just drops, Leo. They're crocodile tears, big and warm, washing the city." She sang the little bird song, her voice low and constant, an anchor in the fever. Gradually, the thermometer began to drop. The boy's breathing calmed. Marcus entered the room at the exact moment Eliza was placing a damp cloth on Leo's forehead. The bedside lamp illuminated the scene. Her dedication, his son's vulnerability, the undeniable intimacy of that care. He saw, with a clarity that blinded him, that this wasn't an act of self-interest. It wasn't a performance to gain status or money. It was something far more fundamental. It was emotional survival. And by imposing distance, he wasn't protecting his family, he was suffocating it. In that instant, the bedroom door opened slightly more. Adelaide stood there, her face pale, her cell phone in hand. She looked at Marcus, her eyes filled with a terror he had never seen before. "Sir," she whispered, her voice failing, "your ex-fiancée, Ms. Lane, she didn't stop." He took the phone from her hand. The headline on the same gossip site screamed in large letters, now with a photo taken sneakily through the window. "Innocence or manipulation? Exclusive photos show. Nanny in intimate moment with billionaire's son." The image was of Eliza, days earlier, asleep, exhausted in the armchair, with Leo's head asleep in her lap. A scene of pure affection, transformed into evidence of a crime. The image on the cell phone was a grenade that exploded in the silence of the room. The sound of thunder outside seemed an echo of the detonation happening inside Marcus. The photo, so innocent in its essence, had been turned into a weapon of mass destruction, pointed directly at the heart of his family. Veronica's venom was lethal because it disguised itself as concern, planting doubt in the social circles where reputation was the most valuable asset. He felt the bitter taste of helplessness. All his money, his immense fortune that allowed him to move markets and crush competitors, couldn't erase a photo or silence the malice spreading like a virus across the internet. His phone vibrated again. It was the chairman of the company board, an older, ruthless man for whom the company's net worth was the only religion. His voice was cold as steel. "Marcus, I hope you have a strategy to contain this exposure. Our investors don't like instability. Brand image is one of our key assets. Your domestic staff contracts have a conduct clause, don't they? Use it." The call ended, but the words hung in the air, cold and imperative. The conduct clause, an ambiguous tool created by lawyers to protect the company's capital from any eventuality. Using it against Eliza would be a monstrosity, an injustice that hurt his newly awakened conscience. He hesitated, which for a man of his stature was an anomaly. He went to his study, his mind a battlefield. On one side, years of training, the logic of the billionaire who learned that every problem has a price and a pragmatic solution. Sacrificing an employee to protect a business empire was, in the cold math of power, an obvious decision. On the other side, the image of Eliza calming his son in the dark elevator, her voice narrating the rain, the way she had brought life back to that mausoleum house. He opened the article again and looked at the photo. Where the world saw manipulation, he saw exhaustion. Where they saw self-interest, he saw devotion. Firing her would be caving to Veronica's blackmail, admitting defeat. But keeping her could be costly, in dividends, in confidence, in euros. While Marcus drowned in his dilemma, Eliza discovered the attack by chance. Going down to the kitchen, she saw Adelaide with her back turned, looking at a tablet screen with an expression of horror. The housekeeper tried to hide the device, but it was too late. Eliza saw the photo, the headline, the poisonous words. A wave of humiliation, hot and suffocating, engulfed her. Every act of kindness, every whispered song, every moment of connection with Leo had all been profaned, distorted, and sold as cheap performance. The public narrative painted her as an opportunist, a fortune hunter. The pain was physical, a sharp stab in her chest. She thought of her mother, her brother, the dignity with which they had always lived, despite the difficulties. Her name, her integrity, was the only inheritance she possessed. And now, it was being publicly destroyed. In that instant, she made a decision, not out of anger, but out of a profound sense of self-preservation. She would not allow herself to be used as a weapon to target that family, nor be turned into a humiliating spectacle. She walked up the stairs with a firmness she didn't feel, knocked on the study door, and entered before he could answer. Marcus looked up, his expression tormented. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to try to explain the pressure, the hesitation, the confusion, but she was faster. With steady hands, she placed a sheet of notebook paper, folded in half, on the mahogany desk. It was her resignation letter, written in simple, clear handwriting. "I quit, Mr. Thorne. My last day is today. Thank you for the opportunity." Her voice was a steel thread, devoid of emotion, which made the decision even more cutting. He stared at her, shocked. The injustice he feared committing now superseded by her initiative. She felt the humiliation, and before he needed to accept his peers' order, she executed the sentence herself. Eliza turned to leave, abandoning him with the piece of paper on the desk. The powerful financier, the man who controlled an empire, stood paralyzed, defeated by the silence and a dignity he could neither buy nor subdue. Eliza's departure didn't leave a silence in the house. It left a void. The separation tore through the routine with the precision of a scalpel, exposing the fragile fabric she had recently woven. The air felt thinner, the corridors longer, and the smell of polished wood returned to being the dominant scent, cold and sterile. Her absence was a noisy presence, a ghost that sat at the breakfast table and walked through the rooms. But nowhere was that absence more devastating than in Leo. The boy shut down. He built a fortress of silence around himself, and no one held the key. He refused to eat, pushing away the meals Adelaide prepared with useless affection. He spent hours sitting in his bed, motionless, his small body tense as a violin string. He didn't cry. His pain was older and deeper than tears. It was the stillness of someone who had known abandonment and recognized it with terrible familiarity. The only sound coming from his room was the incessant repetition of a recording. Using a small audio device Eliza had taught him to operate, Leo listened over and over to her voice telling the legend of the little bird who taught the forest to breathe in the dark. The story, which was once a balm, was now a lament, the only thread still connecting him to her. Marcus, entrenched in his study, heard that voice echoing through the house. Every word of the recording was an accusation. He tried to drown himself in work, immerse himself in the fluctuations of the stock market, analyze the profitability of new investment funds, but the numbers had lost meaning. What good was being a multimillionaire if his net worth couldn't buy a single smile from his son? His assets, his possessions, all his wealth seemed like a bad joke faced with the emotional misery reigning in his own home. That night, he couldn't stay in the study. He went down to the living room, a vast and impeccably decorated space that smelled of expensive lilies, flowers that had beauty but no soul. He sat on the leather sofa, the same one where Leo used to wait for Eliza, and the solitude crushed him. The silence downstairs was absolute, but from upstairs he could still hear the faint, persistent sound of the recording. Eliza's calm voice, speaking about fear and breathing, pierced the walls and found him in his desolation. And there, alone in the gloom, Marcus collapsed. It wasn't a noisy breakdown, but a silent implosion. The armor of control he had worn his entire life disintegrated, and the man beneath was broken. The guilt, the pain, the fear he disguised in business and discipline surfaced with overwhelming force. He had failed. He had confused control with care, power with protection. He had allowed another person's malice to destroy the only good thing that had happened to his family in years. Driven by an impulse that came not from logic, but from pure desperation, he stood up. He grabbed his car keys and left for the garage, without even changing clothes. In the early morning, he drove through the sleeping city, the empty streets of Los Angeles like arteries of a resting body. The powerful, silent car was a bubble of luxury gliding through neighborhoods he only knew from the maps of his developments. He drove for over an hour, following the address on her employee file, until he reached a simple street in south-central LA. The house was small, with a low gate and a small, well-tended front yard. It was a universe away from his mansion. He stopped the car, the engine a whisper in the quiet night, and stared at the window where a faint light was on. What was he doing here? What would he say? There was no strategy, no plan. There was only the raw need to fix what he had broken. With his heart pounding uncontrollably, he got out of the car, walked to the gate, and rang the doorbell. After an instant that felt like an eternity, the door opened. An older woman, with a tired face and shrewd eyes, stared at him. It was Eliza's mother, Maria. She looked him up and down, suspicion etched in every line of her expression. But then her eyes met his, and what she saw there, in the expression of that rich and powerful man, made her step back, opening a small space for him to enter. She saw a request without a mask, a naked and desperate plea that transcended any social difference. The living room was small and simple, but impeccably clean. A sofa covered with a crocheted throw, a vase with colorful plastic flowers on a small coffee table, and framed family photos smiling at a kinder world. The smell was of home, a mix of fresh coffee and clean laundry that Marcus hadn't smelled in years. Eliza's mother, Maria, didn't invite him to sit. She remained standing, arms crossed, a silent guardian of her house and her daughter. Eliza appeared in the hallway, wearing simple pajamas. Her eyes widened slightly upon seeing him there, an incongruous figure in her living room. Surprise gave way to an expression of reserve, a wall he himself had helped to build. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice firm, without the formal address from before. The question was direct, without beating around the bush, and deserved an equally honest answer. "I came," he started, but the words were lost. The speech he had rehearsed in the car, something about business and agreements, about raising her salary, about offering a fortune for her to return, it all seemed ridiculous and offensive in that setting. He took a deep breath. Abandoning the strategy. Leo isn't eating, he isn't talking. He just listens to your voice on a recording all day long. The confession came out raw, stripped of any pride. It wasn't a CEO speaking, it was a desperate father. Eliza listened, her face impassive, but Marcus could see a shadow of pain in her eyes. "I'm sorry for him," she said, and the sincerity in her voice struck him. "But I can't come back." The refusal was a blow. He expected negotiation, perhaps anger, but not that calm and definitive resolution. "Why?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "Because the narrative that was created about me turned me into an outcast. Returning to your house now, under any condition, would be confirming the story they told. It would be admitting that I am the opportunist they say I am, and I am not." She stared at him, dignity serving as armor. "I won't return until the truth is told, until my public image is corrected." It was an ultimatum, but not a financial one. She wasn't asking for money, she was asking for justice. She was asking him to clear the name that the association with his wealth had tainted. And Marcus understood, with overwhelming clarity, that the price of getting Eliza back wasn't paid in dollars or euros. The price was his own vulnerability. He would have to step out of the shadows of his study, out of the protection of his lawyers and publicists, and expose himself. He would have to admit his failure, his hesitation, and confront the world he had worked so hard to keep at a distance. "I will fix it," he promised. And for the first time in a long time, his promise wasn't part of a deal, but an oath. He followed through. The stage for his retraction was the most unlikely, and precisely because of that, the most powerful. His company's annual charity auction. A gala event full of expensive suits, designer dresses, and the clinking of champagne glasses. The press was there, the investors, the business partners, and of course, Veronica Lane, who circled the room like the queen of the night. At the peak of the event, Marcus took the stage, supposedly to announce the record profits of the last quarter, but he didn't speak of dividends. With a calm that cost him every ounce of self-control, he requested the floor. He didn't mention names, didn't point fingers. He spoke about his house. He spoke of a silence that smelled of polished wood, and how one person, with her kindness and wisdom, had brought sound back. He publicly admitted confusing control with care, hiding behind a mask of formality for fear of seeming weak, and then he announced the creation of a new philanthropic venture, funded entirely by his personal capital, a program offering full scholarships in partnership with top universities for the training and qualification of specialized caregivers in child development. "Because care," he said, his voice resounding in the stunned silence of the ballroom, "is the most profitable investment a human being can make." Veronica, sensing the indirect attack, tried to interrupt, standing up with a forced smile. But before she could say a word, Adelaide, who was discreetly positioned near Marcus's sound team, signaled his press secretary. In her hands, the housekeeper held a small recorder. She had documented the conversations in which Veronica pressured her to get the photo, the audio evidence proving the setup. The rumor of the truth spread through the ballroom and shattered like a crystal glass on the floor. Marcus's speech at the auction was more than a retraction. It was a declaration of war against the world of appearances he himself had helped build. The news spread like wildfire, but reactions were mixed. While the gossip media reveled in the scandal and Veronica's downfall, the financial market reacted coldly. Marcus's vulnerability, his public confession of error, was interpreted as weakness. Some more conservative investors, who preferred the image of the inflexible, purely rational businessman began discreetly withdrawing their investments. Company shares, which were once a safe harbor, suffered a slight but significant dip. Marcus felt the impact. In meetings, the atmosphere was tense. The looks from his directors were disapproving. He had broken the golden rule, never mix the personal with the professional. But for the first time, the drop in cash flow didn't terrify him. He would pay the price. He reduced his schedule, delegated important negotiations, and began making sure he was home every day by dusk. He lost a multi-million-dollar contract in Asia because he refused to travel. And, for the first time in years, he slept through the night without the aid of medication. Eliza returned, but not as before. The agreement was a 1-month trial period, during which she would not only be Leo's caregiver, but also the lead on a project to train the household staff, implementing a new method of care based on empathy and sensory development. The dynamic changed. She was no longer the humble employee, but a respected consultant. Interactions with Marcus were professional, but the old tension had been replaced by mutual respect and cautious curiosity. The weeks progressed with advances and setbacks. One day, Leo took his first hesitant steps in the garden with a new cane, Eliza at his side, teaching him to count the paces between the jacaranda tree and the small stone fountain. 10 steps of earth smell, Leo. Now turn left to find the sound of the water. Marcus watched from afar, from his study window, discovering with his son the texture of the world he had always only possessed but never felt. The roughness of the tree bark, the moisture of the moss, the smell of the earth after the rain. On the weekend, an unexpected invitation broke the routine. The non-profit organization in Eliza's neighborhood was holding its annual summer festival, and her brother, Javier, was participating in a musical performance. Eliza, slightly awkward, invited Marcus and Leo, more out of politeness than expecting them to attend. To her surprise, he accepted. And so, on a Saturday night, the luxury car navigated the narrow, colorful streets of the neighborhood, stopping outside a school quad decorated with streamers and balloons. For the first time, the family in suits and expensive shoes set foot on that ground. The culture shock was palpable. Marcus, accustomed to environments where silence was synonymous with power, felt like a foreigner amid the loud music, the laughter, the smell of roasted corn and spiced cider. Leo, on the other hand, was in paradise. The sounds, the smells, the vibrant energy of the place were a feast for his senses. The performance began. Javier, a skinny teenager in thick glasses, was part of a small musical group. Leo, who had been invited to participate, received a triangle. His task was simple: 1 chime every 4 beats of the music. He started well, focused, a proud smile on his face. But in the middle of the song, he lost the rhythm, missed the beat. The small metallic sound out of sync drew attention. The boy got nervous, his face flushed with embarrassment, and he stopped playing, his small hand with the instrument dropping to his side. His silence was louder than any mistake. The audience grew quiet, unsure how to react. It was then that Marcus did something no one, not even he, could have predicted. From the middle of the crowd, he began to clap, loudly and deliberately offbeat. 1, 2, 3 clumsy claps. Everyone turned to the man in the expensive suit who looked utterly ridiculous. He smiled at his son and continued clapping, taking the responsibility for the error upon himself. 1, 2, 3, 4. People understood. Someone laughed, then another. In seconds, the entire quad was clapping, each at their own rhythm, a joyful, supportive mess. Leo, hearing that confusion of sounds, smiled and resumed playing his triangle, finding his place in that imperfect orchestra. It was a small victory, a moment of glory that cost Marcus the courage to appear for the first time in his life. Gloriously ridiculous. The summer festival marked a turning point, an invisible bridge built between 2 worlds. Marcus's gesture, so small and yet so immense, dissolved a part of the armor that still encased him. Returning to the mansion that night was different. The house's luxury seemed less oppressive, the silence less empty. There was a lightness in the air, the memory of shared laughter and offbeat clapping. However, the reality of the outside world soon imposed itself again, bringing with it obstacles that seemed insurmountable. Almost at the end of Eliza's trial month, a letter arrived. The envelope, bearing the letterhead of a renowned visual research and rehabilitation institution, was addressed to her. The invitation was a golden opportunity, the kind of chance that only comes once in a lifetime. A position as a specialist educator, leading an innovative project. With a significantly better salary and resources she had never dreamed of having. It was recognition of all her effort, the validation of her competence. Marcus found out about the proposal by chance. Passing through the corridor, he overheard Eliza's animated conversation on the phone with her mother. "It's an incredible institute, Mom. Yes. The salary is very good. I could finally give you a more comfortable life and pay for the best school for Javier." Her voice was filled with a joy and hope he had no right to interrupt. His first instinct, that of the businessman accustomed to retaining talent with financial offers, was to outbid the proposal. He could easily double, triple the offered salary. But looking at the expression on her face, he understood that it wasn't just about money. It was about her dream, her vocation, her desire to grow and make a greater impact on the world. Making a counteroffer would be an act of selfishness, an attempt to trap her in his private universe. Leo also heard the conversation. Sitting on the staircase step, out of the adults' line of sight, he absorbed every word. The joy in Eliza's voice, the mention of a new job, the possibility of a new life. The boy said nothing. He simply stood up silently and went to his room. The maturity with which he began to process the imminence of loss was heartbreaking. He went quiet, a dense, ancient stillness, the resignation of someone who had already learned that the people we love can leave. Marcus, feeling the weight of the decision approached Eliza that afternoon. He didn't ask her to stay. Instead, he offered conditions and freedom. "That is a fantastic opportunity, Eliza. You deserve it. If you decide to go, I want you to know you have my full support. We can adjust your hours, give you the flexibility you need for the rest of the month. Just think carefully." His attitude surprised her. She expected resistance, perhaps aggressive negotiation. His respect for her professional growth was the most unexpected gift. The penultimate night of the contract arrived, and with it, an atmosphere of farewell hung over the house. The lights, programmed to dim gradually throughout the night, began to turn off, plunging the rooms into soft shadows. In the bedroom, Leo was restless, his breathing short, his body tense under the sheet. "Eliza," he called, his voice weak in the dark. Can you tell the bird story?" The request was more than a bedtime story. It was a test, a desperate appeal to know if the voice that calmed him was still there for him. Marcus, who was in the hallway, heard the call and his heart clenched. He felt his son's panic, the need to hear that specific voice, and knew he himself couldn't replace it. He didn't have the key to that fear. The bedroom door opened softly. Eliza entered, but not in her work uniform. She wore her regular clothes, jeans, and a simple shirt. She was just herself. Without a word, she sat on the edge of the bed, the gesture familiar and comforting. She didn't tell the bird story. Instead, she began to narrate the wind blowing outside, describing it as a traveler carrying the promises we make when we learn to listen to our own hearts. Her voice was a silk thread weaving calm into the darkness. Marcus remained standing in the doorway, a silhouette in the gloom, witnessing the scene. And there, seeing the silent devotion of that woman, the peace she brought to his son, he finally grasped the most difficult truth of all. True love meant giving up control. It meant having the courage to stay by their side, even without guarantees, even without contracts. It meant letting go of the hand, and yet not leaving. Dawn arrived with a softness the house hadn't known. The sunlight no longer seemed an intruder, but a welcome guest, painting golden streaks on the marble floor. Marcus walked downstairs and found Eliza in the kitchen, an untouched cup of coffee between her hands. The question that defined everyone's future hung between them, silent and heavy. He poured himself a coffee, the mundane gesture charged with extraordinary tension. It was she who broke the silence, her voice clear and firm, like someone who had spent the entire night talking to her own soul. "I'm going to take the job at the Institute," she said, and Marcus's heart sank, a free fall into the void. He simply nodded, his face a mask of control that barely hid his devastation. But she continued, and her next words rebuilt his world on a completely new foundation. "But I proposed a different path to them, one no one expected." She looked at him, her eyes shining with the force of her conviction. "I want to split my week. I want to spend 3 days at the Institute, developing new techniques and research, and 2 days here, but not as a nanny. I want to use this house, with your support, as a pilot project for the foundation you announced. I want to train other caregivers, transform what we've experienced here into a method that can help other families, other children. What you created, Marcus, wasn't just a PR move to clean up your image. It was an investment in human capital, and I want to help ensure the highest possible return, the happiness of children who need us." The proposal was brilliant in its simplicity and audacity. She wasn't choosing between two paths. She was creating a third, a bridge that united her dreams with his, her needs with Leo's. Marcus felt a wave of admiration so intense it left him breathless. She wasn't just kind and empathetic, she was a visionary. He took a deep breath, and for the first time, the words came from his heart, not his strategist mind. "Eliza," he began, his voice rough, "I accept, but you need to understand. I need you here not as an employee, not as a project consultant. I need you as part of a life project." He moved closer, the distance between them shrinking. "I don't know how to be the father Leo needs. I don't know how to fill the silence of this house. I'm learning, and I can't promise a perfect fairy tale ending. What I can offer is a partnership, respect, and a place by your side for us to learn to breathe in the dark, together." At that moment, small, hesitant footsteps sounded in the corridor. Leo appeared at the kitchen door, his pajamas rumpled, his face turned toward their voices. He had sensed the change in energy, the resolution of tension. Groping the air in front of him, he walked slowly until he stopped between the two of them. His small left hand found Marcus's leg, and his right hand searched for and found Eliza's hand. He held them, uniting them. Then he lifted his face and made a request that sealed the new beginning. "Can we listen to the rain on the roof together when it comes?" Outside, the city of Los Angeles awoke with its chaotic symphony of horns, construction, and the smell of hot pastries from the corner bakery. But inside, a new balance was settling, a silence that was no longer of absence, but of peace. The house remained large, an estate of bricks and luxury, but now, finally, it was starting to transform into a home. 6 months passed. The summer rain returned to fall over Los Angeles, but now it was a familiar song, not a threat. In the mansion's garden, which had transformed into a sensory paradise under Eliza's guidance, Leo walked with newfound confidence. With the tip of his cane, he touched the damp earth, then the base of a rose bush, and smiled. "This one has thorns that feel like tiny cat teeth, and the leaf is smooth on top and rough underneath," he narrated to his father, who was kneeling beside him on the grass, his expensive suit pants stained with dirt. Marcus didn't care. He ran his finger over a rose petal, feeling the velvety texture and the raindrops. "And what color is its smell, son?" he asked, his voice soft, stripped of his old haste. "It's a very strong pink, almost red, that makes my nose itch a little," Leo replied, laughing. Marcus watched him, and in his mind, the concepts of wealth and assets were forever reconfigured. The sound of that laughter was his most valuable asset, a profit no stock market operation could ever provide. The glass door leading to the garden opened, and Eliza appeared, carrying a small tray with 3 cups of hot cocoa. She stopped for an instant, observing the scene. Marcus, with relaxed shoulders, and Leo, his face turned toward the sky, feeling the fine rain. Her heart filled with a deep, serene peace. The project at the foundation was a success. Her work at the institute was gratifying, but her greatest achievement was right there, on that patch of wet grass. She approached and handed a cup to each of them. Marcus looked at her, and his eyes said everything words sometimes couldn't reach: gratitude, partnership, love. "He was teaching me how to see the garden," he said with a smile. Eliza touched Leo's face, feeling his skin warmed by the cocoa. "He's a good teacher," she replied, and her gaze met Marcus's again, sealing the truth of that statement. Later, as night fell, the 3 sat on the covered porch, wrapped in blankets. The rain now fell harder, the sound rhythmic on the roof, exactly as Leo had requested on that decisive night. The boy, nestled between the 2, breathed slowly, his body completely relaxed. He no longer needed the bird story to find calm. He had learned to fly. The house, once a silent, dark giant, now breathed with them. There was the sound of the rain, the murmur of low voices, the clinking of cups. There was light where there had only been darkness before, and that night, when the living room clock struck the same time as Eliza and Leo's first meeting, the boy fell asleep in peace. Not because someone held him tightly, but because he learned, with both of them, to breathe in the dark.